today's Low Carbon Skills Fund, Phase 2. Really great to see so many people here today for the session. Appreciate that everyone's coming at it from slightly different positions in terms of both the size of your organisations. We've got individual schools right up to some very large multi-academy trusts on the call today, and also people coming from different positions of sort of knowledge and experience in this area. In terms of, we've got clients that we've worked with before and other organisations who have gone some way down the line to developing energy strategies and having some knowledge of low carbon heating and the like, and others that are very much new to this, perhaps didn't get involved in the phase 1 process or haven't got involved in energy strategy generally. So I'm going to keep today's session reasonably brief. Hopefully there's not going to be too much duplication, but inevitably there's going to be some people that are going to know some of this stuff already. But it's really just to introduce kind of the scheme, the purpose of it, the main requirements, some of the timescales, and really just get an idea of what the next steps should be for your organisations to give us the best chance of success moving forward. So in terms of what we want to do today, I'm just going to sort of set the scene a little bit with a brief summary of the scheme, where it fits into the overall strategy, in terms of some of the lessons learned and what we learned from the PSDS and Low Carbon Skills Fund schemes from the back end of last year and earlier part of 2021, and talk a bit about eligibility. I'm joined today by my colleague Tom Deacon, who's another partner at Barker, and he's going to be then just talking a little bit more in depth about how the Low Carbon Skills Fund Phase 2 differs in terms of its application process, information requirements, and how that application process is going to work. And then at the end, I'll just wrap up with some thoughts on next steps. And as I say, I'll leave a bit of time for Q&A. So we're going to try and keep this presentation reasonably short, sort of 20 minutes or so, leave plenty of time for a Q&A at the end. But as I say, if you'd like to add anything into the chat, then we'll go through those at the end. If you want to type something into the chat function. As I say, we're going to record this presentation up to the point of the Q&A, and then we'll stop that and we'll make that recording available for either yourselves for sharing with colleagues, and obviously for anyone who couldn't make today's session. And just general sort of session etiquette, again, if I can just remind you to just turn your microphones off. I think it's all gone fairly quiet now, but you can just keep your microphones muted unless you're speaking in the Q&A at the end. That just helps the sound generally for everyone else. The Low Carbon Skills Fund Phase 2 is obviously a follow-on from the Public Sector Decarbonisation Scheme, which was launched in October last year. At that time, it was a two-pronged fund. There was the Low Carbon Skills Fund announced in parallel with the with an associated capital funding scheme, which is the Public Sector Decarbonisation Scheme itself. So you could apply for either or indeed both of those sort of funding streams. Subsequent to that, so the Skills Fund, just to be clear, is a fund for paying for professional help to help develop your energy strategy, and the Public Sector Decarbonisation Scheme is the funding pot for actually delivering the resulting capital projects. So Skills Fund for producing energy strategy, doing feasibility studies and the like, Low Carbon Skills Fund for implementing LED lighting, low carbon heating systems, solar PV schemes, and all those sorts of things that were done the earlier part of this year. So this is obviously a much smaller fund than last year, although in terms of the Skills Fund, it's still substantial. There's a £15 million fund. It was launched on Wednesday last week. It's funded through Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy and administered through Salix Finance, who are now wholly owned part of the government, to actually administer the funding stream. But it comes from BEIS rather than from, for example, the Department for Education, who you'll obviously be familiar with, or a lot of other funding streams in our area. So of the total £15 million fund, they've actually taken on some feedback from the last scheme, understanding that the education sector and schools and academies are coming from a very different place in terms of knowledge, experience and resource than larger public sector organisations such as the NHS and local authorities. So, and also they've launched it on the week that most schools were across the country were breaking up for the summer holiday. So they have actually ring-fenced a separate part of that fund, £3.5 million, which is exclusively available to schools and academies. And that will have a separate application window. We'll talk about the dates for that later. So the main difference with this fund is that it's very much trying to develop the parts of the phase one that didn't really happen probably at the volume that was intended in terms of decarbonisation schemes, which is the heating decarbonisation. So there was a lot of work done for decarbonising and energy efficiency projects, a lot of PV schemes, a lot of insulation projects, a lot of LED lighting schemes done. But because of the incredibly tight timescales that were necessary as part of that initial scheme, a lot of the heating schemes that are much more complex and involved difficult long lead-in times, often utilities connections and all those sort of complications, a lot of that work didn't happen, probably to the quantity that was desired by Salix and Bays. So this scheme is now focused much more on that as a core delivery. So the funding is available for delivering decarbonisation plans, but solely in the area of heat decarbonisation, and by that we mean predominantly replacing boilers, plant rooms, heating systems, and perhaps an element of technology around that, such as insulation projects to remove heating load as a whole. So the focus for this is very much twofold. One is to help organisations like yourselves develop your energy strategies, but in the particular field of heat decarbonisation, because hopefully this is on your agenda, whether you're already down the line or whether you're just starting out. Energy efficiency, energy strategy is very much a critical part of managing our estates more widely in the coming years, both for financial reasons and for obviously climate change reasons. But secondly, although they haven't been able to announce, Bays and Salix haven't been able to announce a corresponding capital funding round like they did the first time, I think it's reasonable to assume and pragmatic to assume that some form of capital funding round is going to follow at some point after this skills fund process. So we're very much looking to use this process to get your organisations kind of bid ready, if you like, for any future funding rounds that come up, particularly in the areas of heat decarbonisation. So it's not been confirmed, but it seems logical that, you know, why else would you put £15 million into the public sector to help them develop these processes without then following up with the capital funding? So that's kind of the context of where we are with all of this. In terms of the eligibility, I mean, the fund itself is open to the whole public sector. There are caveats. As you saw on the previous slide, there was a little excerpt from a Salix webinar, and some of you will have no doubt been on those Salix webinars. Others of you maybe haven't done. So when we share the slides and the output from today's session, we'll include the Salix presentation slides within that pack at the same time, just so that everyone's up to speed with the same information. Tom and I are actually having a call directly with Salix straight after this webinar today as well. So we've got some sort of technical queries, and also gives us an opportunity to sort of deal with those directly and make sure that we're in the best position to help get the applications through as smoothly as possible. So if there are any questions today that are partly for sort of Salix maybe as well as for ourselves, then please do raise those, and there'll be an opportunity for then perhaps Tom and I to raise those with Salix at 12:30 when we have a call with them. The fund is available to the public sector. Obviously, we're predominantly focused on the education sector and schools and academies in particular. So that's where we're looking at. It's maintained and academy schools, which is again similar to the previous round, and obviously multi-academy trusts form part of that. I won't go into the details of the additionality criteria, because there's a dedicated slide on that in the Salix webinar that I can show you. But the fundamental principle is that the grant fund is obviously not available to fund things that are already in train, that have been funded by other means, or that are basically going to be going ahead anyway. We need to show that this is going to fund additional work that wouldn't have happened without the support of the Salix Low Carbon Skills Fund. Delivery deadlines in terms of the decarbonisation plans themselves, that's the end of March 2022. So actually quite a reasonable timescale for delivering those plans compared to some of the deadlines that we were looking at previously. Certainly the application window is tighter, and delivering projects has been very tight in terms of delivery timescales. But actually, we're not overly concerned from a delivery point of view. But just so you know, that's when it's happening. And Tom will go through the process and some timings in a moment as part of his slides. There's no minimum and then there's no maximum value, and it is grant funding, not loan funding. So it's 100% grant funding that you can apply for, basically to develop these schemes. And the focus, as I mentioned earlier, is very much going to be for heating systems that are at the end of their economic life. So one of the things that we'll be talking to you as organisations about as part of your application process, if we get into that, with you as separate organisations, is concentrating our efforts in areas where we've got some knowledge about the heating systems already. We know that from the public sector decarbonisation scheme, both phase 1 and 2, particularly in the phase 2, one of the key criteria was demonstrating that your heating systems were at the end of their economic life. And so you're not going to be successful in applying for grant funding for a boiler, a plant room that was replaced 2 years ago, and understandably so. That would probably be considered a waste of public money. So thinking about identifying heating systems that are not necessarily right at the end of their life, but certainly reaching the end of their economic life is the focus for the fund. Okay, so I'm going to pass you over to Tom. And I'll stop sharing my screen, and then hopefully you can actually do this together. And Tom, would you like to just go through the detail on some of the information requirements?
I can, sure. Let me just full screen that 1 second. Okay, cool. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Rob, can you hear me? Good. Okay, cool. Just to touch on some of the information that Rob was just mentioning around the focus. Obviously, we've spent quite a bit of time in the last week looking at the guidance from Salix around what constitutes a heat decarbonisation plan, and it is quite an involved process. And as Rob's already rightly said, it's around focusing first and foremost on those sites where heating systems are at the end or coming to their end of the economic life. But even if that's not the case, it's about looking at first of all heat source first, and ultimately the plan is there to give clear guidance and timescale and seek a solution to remove the need for fossil fueled heating, largely gas or oil, at the sites. But it does go beyond that. So it also looks at the building fabric, so and the wider electrical capacity and load issues, for example, on site, because generally speaking, current technology that's available to replace gas boilers would involve an increase in electrical consumption. So what they're looking for as part of these sort of consolidated heat decarbonisation plans is to take a site or a building and identify the best solution or solutions, but then look more widely at how that could be optimized through improving building insulation, etc. And the expectation is that these plans will be effectively provide all the data and a precursor for future funding, whether that be PSDS or other things. The There is a guidance, there is a detailed template as part of the Salix website information, and they've got quite a large sort of 4 or 5 page document around to give you guidance around what a heat decarbonisation plan looks like. So I just wanted to signpost that really, because obviously there's a lot of information in there. So in terms of the, sorry, just clicking through my slides 1 second. So in terms of the actual information to lodge your application, as with most of the Salix applications, there's requirements around authorising official project lead information, etc. With this new round, they're also asking to provide both your DFE URN number, but also your publicly available UK PRN number, and also the area information for the buildings or building that you're looking to undertake the heat decarbonisation plan on. So if you haven't already, it's certainly beneficial to gather some of that information ready, or it will be essential as part of the application. Equally, there is an expectation around articulating specifically your current understanding of your building's energy consumption, the carbon output or carbon footprint of your building or buildings, and also the greenhouse gas emission, etc. Now, for larger organisations, you may well be required to do streamlined energy carbon reporting, in which case a lot of that information should be available. But if not, there's some work to do to secure that information, either from your energy provider, or if you use a broker, then you may need to speak with them to get that information to allow you to complete the actual skills form funding application. Moving on, the forms then also ask for information around your current view on energy strategy, where you are on your journey. If you read the guidance, they completely understand that people may be on various stages of their journey, but it's around articulating what you've done already, what your future plans are, what your leadership commitments are towards net carbon zero, decarbonisation and the like, and being able to articulate those in a few paragraphs as part of the application. In terms of the actual heat decarbonisation plan development, again, that follows suit. So you may be very early on in your journey, or you may actually want to secure this funding to top up the work or continue some of the work you've already started by way of development of energy strategy, development of heat decarbonisation planning. So this might not necessarily be a fund to get you started, it might be a fund to help you develop what you've already got, and that's quite clear in the guidance. In terms of information, I think from our perspective, and talking to a number of clients on this already, as Rob's already alluded to, I think because this is focused on heat, really need to consider perhaps being selective around which sites or buildings that you apply for funding. Certainly for large organisations with large portfolios, to apply to do heat decarbonisation plans for your entire estate may be seen by Salix as being perhaps too ambitious, and therefore it's worth considering the nature of your portfolio of buildings, and consider a focused application for maybe a selected number of sites based on age, imminent heat source failure, condition data, but also looking at your energy consumption and maybe targeting those with the highest gas consumption, because from a Salix perspective, they can see that you're focusing in your information. So using things like condition information on boilers, on energy information, etc., is worthwhile to think about before you actually sit down to write the application, so that it is focused in a way that Salix will easily relate to. So in terms of the application process, the portal opened yesterday. We've spent most of the afternoon yesterday going through the questions. It is very similar. It is similar in certain ways to the previous low carbon skills fund applications, but very different in others. And some of the information that I've just been through is a reflection of the new portal. If you haven't logged in and registered, I suggest you do that straight away. For all those general public sector bodies, the portal is now open. Applications are being determined
Hopefully you can see that now.
Yep.
So yeah, just to wrap up really in terms of where we go next with this, in terms of kind of an admin perspective, if any of you are new to this and new to the Salix process, one of the things you can do sort of fairly quickly and easily is to just register with Salix, go onto Salix Finance and register an account for your school or trust. Then the next stage would be to start working with us on, as Tom says, working on the bid strategy, deciding if, obviously, if you're an individual school or a very small multi-academy trust, the likelihood is we'll just look at universal coverage of your portfolio. But for some of those larger estates that we're working with, as Tom suggested, maybe a bit more of a targeted approach is suggested based on sort of condition and prioritisation with some of the knowledge. So we can start to talk to you about working up that bid strategy and then getting together some of the information required for the application. And I know some of it sounds a little bit technical, but it's actually fairly straightforward, and it's not actually I wouldn't be put off by the fact that you might not have some of that information at the same level as other organisations. That's not really how the application process works. It's about articulating where you are on a particular journey. So if you are literally starting out on this and have very little information, you don't have an energy strategy or whatever, that's not a problem, because that's kind of what this fund is for. But obviously, if for those organisations that perhaps have done other areas, work in other areas, or have already developed this quite significantly, they say just want to get an understanding, a bit of narrative around where you are on that journey, so they can understand why you need this funding in particular and how that fits into your overall strategy. As part of this, although this is very much about heat decarbonisation, and there's a few questions come up in the chat which we'll go through in a moment, so I think it's important that we just sort of clarify exactly how we define sort of heat decarbonisation versus some of the wider decarbonisation. There are obviously other things that we can talk to you about at the same time in terms of other technologies, other energy efficiency projects that you might want to be involved with, and there are other ways of funding those. There might well be future funding strategies or future funding rounds for those. So if you're not already dealing with those or not helping you with those already, just because this is focused on heat decarbonisation doesn't mean that needs to be the sole focus of our conversation. It's just that that's how we need to target this particular funding round. So there's a lot more that can be done on a wider energy strategy basis. The thing is that the heat decarbonisation is the most complex and the most technical. So it's the one where, and it's also the one with the sort of least obvious returns on investment and payback. So it's the one that's most sticky in terms of getting the public sector to adopt it, which is why BEIS and Salix are supporting it financially in the way that they're doing, to the exclusion of some of the other more mainstream technologies such as PV and LED, which do actually work out quite beneficial on a commercial basis in their own right. So so we're doing another webinar, just to signpost that, on the 6th of September. There's sort of two purposes for that. One is to make this sort of information available to some of the schools that are on summer breaks and just can't make it during the sort of July-August period. We've got a lot of demand for schools and academies that are on that sort of break at the moment, so we've put in one for the beginning, sort of very early part of the new term, so that hopefully there is still time to deal with some of those before the 13th of September. But also we can use that as an opportunity to update on any other developments that have happened in the interim. So, by all means, register for that, even if you've been on today's session, because there hopefully might be something useful for you there. And we'll try and signpost at the beginning of that anything that's new and relevant to those that have been on already. And if not, and then obviously you can leave if there are some administrative things that are just for people that are new to the whole process. So we're going to drop into the Q&A in a moment, but because there's definitely some questions there that we need to answer, and then I'll do the ones from the chat, and then we'll open it up to all of you to sort of raise your hands, or again, as I say, you just add things into the chat window. But if you want to follow this up, and if we're not already talking to you sort of directly, here are the email addresses. This is our sort of general education one, which would have been the sort of one that you'd use for signing up to the webinars, etc. And we'll log all those inquiries, and then it's obviously my personal email and Tom's personal email addresses. So feel free to email any or all of those if you'd like to proceed with this, and or like to at least initiate a conversation about how we can support you with your bid, and we can then talk you through the next steps, because it will obviously differ depending on the size of your organisations, the complexity of that bid, talk to you about the commercials and all of that sort of element of it. But I think it's going to be difficult to sort of cover that all off in today's session, given the sort of wide range of organisations that we've got. So please get in touch after today. We'll share the slides from the session as noted, and then if you need to know anything else, then please just contact us directly. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now.